specifically?
So we're based out of 2 locations now. So Raleigh, North Carolina, and Bassett, Virginia is our second location that we acquired 4 years ago.
Gotcha. How far apart are those 2 spots?
They're like 2 hours and 10 minutes away. The reason for expanding to the Bassett area is because it's the closest available tailwater trout fishing to a lot of cities: Raleigh, Greensboro, Winston, Roanoke, Richmond. And so when we acquired that business, the goal was to try to, expand, almost double the size of our business. So we were running, let's say, like 100 guided trips in Raleigh. And then we started off in the first year, I think we ran like 50. Then it became like 75 the next year. Then it was like 120 last year. I'll probably run 200 trips on the Smith this year for trout. Like I said, it's close to some major cities. And so people that would normally travel, let's say, to the South Holston in Tennessee, they could do a trip in a day. And so the growth rate on that fishery has been really good, and the success rate is really good. And then with that, we also have a developing fishery. The state of Virginia periodically does fish counts as well as growth measurements on the fishery, and reproductive success on the wild brown trout is off the charts. But in addition to that, since May of 2020, they've been managing the dam with a sluice gate activity and inside consistent water. So the growth rate is improving as well. Prior to May of 2020, the dam was functioning as a power supply for Dominion Energy, and they'd have these periods of high water, then low water, then high water and low water when they're operating the dam for power generation. And Virginia Wildlife just found out that it kind of harms the fishery a lot. The fish growth doesn't really reach its potential, and so we'd have these like 5 to 7 to 9 inch brown trout that would be only like 5 to 7 years old. So they're really old, but they weren't growing. So now our growth rate with the consistent water in the last 4 years has been a lot better. It's been like an inch of growth rate a year, as opposed to like 2/3 of a centimeter of some of the growth of previously. So you take that, and then we couple it with, we do a lot of warm water fishing this time of year. We fish for largemouth bass. We expanded 3 years ago to fish the Stanton River in Alta Vista, Virginia for smallmouth. We run about 25 to 30 trips there this year. And in the Raleigh area, we fish for largemouth. We also fish for spotted bass on the Cape Fear, which is a new fishery for us last year. And that's a great fishery. I think there's more spotted bass in that fishery than there is like sunfish. So you take beginners. We've had some large groups. We've had a group at the Air Force this year. We're doing a team building event later this week. And you take beginner fly fishers, and they all have a high success rate of catching bass on their first time ever even throwing a fly rod. So we like that kind of fishing. The fishing around Raleigh can be a little harder. A lot of pressure on the Neuse River, especially right on the Greenway. But we've found a couple beats in there. We could always find fish there as well still, even with the high pressure on the fishery.
That's super cool. I had a couple of questions for you. I don't want to forget about, I'm curious about how you kind of facilitate that group trip stuff. But in terms of the management, have you noticed that given that you have this kind of like this view into both the Virginia management and the North Carolina management, do you feel that one does a better job than the other at managing for the long-term success of the fishery?
What's kind of convenient for us is that we're on a weekly call with the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. We have a conference call, and our 2 biggest fisheries that we fish are both managed by Army Corps on that call: the Neuse River here in Raleigh, and then the dam which is where the Smith River starts in Bassett. So the challenges with the dam management with the Army Corps is on Philpott, they're trying to maintain lake level. But now with, feedback from people like myself and the Dan River Basin Association, they're taking recommendations on how to sustain the fishery, but also sustain recreation on that river. When it comes to the Neuse, the original site plan for the Neuse was, I think, to make 7 dams along the Neuse River on the tributaries to try to manage the river flow. And after construction, they only made 2. I think they made 1 downriver near and then the other one, the Falls Lake Dam. And so when you have these periodic large rain event, especially during the wetter months, if there's flooding concerns downriver on the Neuse River, the Army Corps will hold water back almost, to the breaking point on that dam, and they'll blast a wall of water out on the Neuse River. So when it comes to management, the management on Philpott Lake with the Army Corps on that trout tailwater, the Smith River, is better. It's a smaller system though, and so it's a little bit easier to control. The management on the Falls Lake Dam by the Army Corps is not as good because they got flood concerns, but they also have storage concerns on the water supply for Raleigh, right? It's a huge area that's, increasing the pull and draw on that lake. They have minimum flows on both, target minimum flows, but just the ranges of water that you see on the Neuse compared to the Smith are like, astronomically different. I think the highest last year on the Neuse River was like 6,000 CFS. And, right now, it's a little high right now just because of the recent rain, but the average, in the summertime is like between like 100 and 200 CFS. So you could see like these huge fluctuations. In addition to that, it's a huge migratory route for a lot of anadromous species. You got striped bass in the Neuse, you got American shad, you got hickory shad, you got heron. And going forward, I'm always in their ear trying to manage that better. And, in recent years, they've kind of done some step-up increases and step-up decreases, which is good. But there's some long-term problems with the Neuse River when it comes to so it's kind of a long-winded answers. But yeah, I think the management on the Smith River is just it's easier for them because there's less variables. You're not dealing with the water supply. You're just trying to manage lake level. They keep the tap on in the summertime to keep the trout alive with a minimum flow that covers the substrate, gets those bugs going, and which gets those minnows going, which gets the trout bigger. However, with that, there's some variables in that as well. That they are trying to fix the generator, which was taken out in May of 2020, and then they may be going back to like a big amount of water on the Smith again a couple of years from now. So we'll see.
Are they pushing out a lot of water when the trout are actually spawning? Like, are they blasting reds out of the substrate? Is that something that you've noticed?
So the way they've done it, just going back a little bit, in May of 2020, they had like a 100-year flood on the Smith where Philpott Lake swelled so much that it was actually coming over the dam in the emergency spillway. That's how much water. I think it was like 21 inches of rain in like 3 days or something like that. So there was a mudslide in the generator at the dam, and they've been trying to repair that ever since then. They've been managing it with a sluice gate operation where they just open the gate up at 85 feet and let the water, come out. If the lake gets really high, they'll open it up a little bit more. So just the management since then has been tremendously better. Because the generator with 2 generators, I think the flow is around, 1,500 CFS. Of 1 meter is like 700 CFS. So the answer to that is no, they're not blasting out reds. The reproductive success of the fish on the Smith for the brown trout it's like off the charts. There's like 2,000 to 2,500 brown trout per mile on the Smith. They make up 85% of the trout population. The other 15% is like stock rainbow and stock brook trout. And it's substantially less water than what we have in the summertime. But they don't do that until the temperatures are cool enough outside so it doesn't affect the trout negatively by stressing them with high water temperature. And we see hundreds of active reds that time of year. There's not a lot of people fishing or walking through them. And again, like multiple pairings of fish on these reds and really good reproductive success there.
That's awesome. Did you grow up local to that area?
I actually grew up in New Jersey. Okay. I went to college in New Hampshire and then to the Raleigh area for an ice hockey job. All right. I owned an ice hockey business in Northwest New Jersey. And then I started guiding kind of on the side just because I saw a niche. We had this really good local warm water fishery that you catch bass and shad, crappie and white bass and stuff. And I saw an opportunity where I could use my, love or passion for teaching and training people and kind of similar to coaching. And then took just transferred it to like the guiding part-time on the side. And then it started really growing. I'd say 5 years ago, really kind of devoted most of my time to it and kind of left coaching and focused more on the guiding. And then I think we've had 15% growth the last 3 years on our business overall, and expanded. We have 3 part-time guys that run trips for us. They're all excellent. We've grown it to where we have over 165-star reviews on Google, an endorsed guy for the last 5 years, an Orbis Pro for the last 10. I think we have over 100 5-star reviews on my Orbis Pro site as well. So we're doing the right things. We're trying to really focus on customer service, and not as much as, focus on catching fish, but just, giving people a good experience. And our guys are really good at recognizing that and reading people. Some people just want to be out there to disconnect and, listen to the water and learn a little fly fishing. Some people are, more geared towards on really focusing on specific technique, whether that's streamer fishing or dry fly fishing. And so we're good at reading what customers are looking for and providing them that kind of customer service.
Sweet. Did you grow up doing the PA stuff or the Raritan stuff in New Jersey? What was kind of your inroad there?
Well, it's funny you say the Raritan. My dad and I, we probably fished to Sandy Hook Bay, I don't know, probably every summer, at least 10 weekends fishing in Sandy Hook. And my dad was a really accomplished shad fisherman as well. So we go an hour west to the Delaware River to fish for shad at Dingman's Ferry in the PA. Beyond that, I lived in Long Valley after college, and we had both the Musconecon River and the Raritan River, South Branch of the Raritan on each side of the mountain. I lived on School's Mountain, so I'd go 5 minutes to fish the Musconecon River for trout. I'd go 5 minutes the other side of the mountain to fish the South Branch right in town, Long Valley, and there's plenty of wild trout in there. People always ask me, is there trout in New Jersey? I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of trout in New Jersey. And then occasional weekend trips, up to the Catskills or out to the Poconos. We'd fish the Broadhead and the Poconos and the Bushkill. And then venture out a little further, we'd fish the Scranton. We'd fish the Lackawanna, which has got some big brown trout in it. And then, weekend trips, we'd fish the Catskill streams, West Branch, really like the Neversink. We'd love fishing the Neversink River. And that's kind of where I got it going, I guess.
That's awesome. How old were you when your dad kind of got you into it?
Well, when I first started fishing, I for years, my dad, I was 4 to 8, we lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and that's where I started playing hockey as well. A 12-inch yellow perch was the biggest fish I had caught for most of my childhood. So that's kind of my oldest memory of fishing with my dad is just pond fishing in Michigan. And then I got a little bit older. My dad was a huge Lake Michigan fisherman. He'd have 4 rods with downriggers and you'd trolling for king or coho, or I really like lake trout fishing really deep in Lake Michigan as well. Yeah. Those were good times.
Yeah. I guess, what would you say are some of the biggest differences that you noticed once you kind of transitioned to the Southern trout game? Were there any striking similarities, but I guess also what kind of adjustments did you have to make when you first came down south?
That's one thing. It's hot here compared to where I'm from. We have high humidity in the summertime in New Jersey, but
and fewer tailwaters too, right?
Yeah. So I'd say a couple things is that with any fishery, you got to learn access, and you got to learn what kind of bugs are. With the tailwaters, you got a lot of similar bugs, the Catskills, or even in Long Valley in comparison, the hatches are substantially more than the hatches are in the Southeast. So with that, I tell people all the time, if you're a good fisherman, or if you're a good dry fly fisherman, anywhere there's trout, you find a way to figure it out and crack the code, right? So, for example, my buddy and I, we're gonna go to Idaho in 3 weeks from now for a week, and we're just renting a camping van. We're gonna fish trails along the Owyhee River, and we're just gonna figure it out. If they're hitting streamers, we're on a streamer fish. If there's fish on top, we're gonna try to figure out some flies that or look like those flies and where those are. And so I guess to answer your question, I not much of adjustment, not to sound self-promote or anything like that. I'm a pretty experienced trout fisherman on the fly. I really dedicated a lot of time to that from the age, started fly fishing at age 12, but from 17 on, that was my preferred way of catching trout. My dad was a spin fisherman and would just, he'd either throw spinners or even chuck bait. And that was his gig. But when I went to Alaska when I was 17 for high school graduation, I kind of saw how good fly fishing could be for trout. And then I had a buddy in New Jersey that was an Orvis like retail guy, and he'd take me on a lot of private water in New Jersey and just teach me like wet fly technique and nymphing technique and kite lining before like anybody was doing that kind of stuff. So like not much of an adjustment going to fishing the Southeast tailwaters, but definitely less bugs when it comes to like, actively rising fish. So you really got to, work on your subsurface game. And then if you're going to guide on that, dial in your techniques at depth and just to try to generate ease for your clients and stuff like that. So we figure it out though. I tell people all the time, like nobody gets skunked when we're trout fishing on the Smith. We had my oldest client ever on Friday, 93-year-old dry fly fisherman. He could chuck it 80 feet on. He was impressive. And then we had our youngest last month, a 7-year-old, and he caught trout too. So we get people on trout pretty easily.
That's awesome. Do you typically have like certain, I guess, markers throughout the season where you're going to be shifting your technique from this to that? Like, do you have kind of like a designated streamer time of year, or is it something that you kind of always have in your back pocket to throw?
Yeah, I mean, so just to answer, like streamers, yeah, we want to be on the higher water, and a lot of times it's post spawn. It's really good. So it gets a little cooler. So if you might lose some of your older clientele that don't want to be out in the cold. But if you have, let's say like your 25 to like 55-year-old client that wants to try to trophy hunt for a large brown and throw some weighted flies or weighted lines all day as opposed to just, getting the numbers of nymphs. Yeah, it's winter and early spring are really good for that. Right now, like we're shifting techniques, especially with the real heat a couple weeks ago. We've been really dialing back on fly size and tippet size, right? We're fishing smaller flies. We're fishing lighter tippets, like as far down as 7X right now, which is like 2-pound test, and we're fishing some fast water too. So with that heat, a lot of those wild fish will push right up into the rapids. So you got to run the runs that are close to the fast water. So yeah, we're always shifting or changing technique depending on what the conditions are. You have leaves to deal with when you get into the fall. Call that the leaf hatch. We got a kayak hatch right now going on in the summertime on the Smith
I bet.
So he owned the Smith River Outfitters before I bought it 4 years ago, and he just managed it as a canoe and kayak rental and did a couple guide trips. But I kind of like, when I purchased the business, I told him, I said, yeah, I don't want to rent canoes and kayaks. He was kind of like disappointed, but I saw all the work that he had to do with that by taking them off the rack, loading them on the trailer, teaching someone how to kayak, cleaning the boats, putting them back on a rack. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I just want to take people fishing. So anyways, he's trained all those people really good, that kayak and canoe. I'll talk to you a little too much when I'm focused on like fishing a run, which I don't mind, but they always go behind me. So they look and see, they always ask me, see what side the river you're fishing. And they never kayak through your run, which is really cool and courteous. They're trained well on the Smith. They're nice people up there.
Nice. Trained through the school of hard knocks, or everyone's typically pretty polite.
And so it's like, they just know, like, and I'll be fishing, let's say the right side of the river. My clients will have their poles on the right side of the river running either a dry fly or a nymph through a section, and they'll paddle behind us on the left. They'll stay away from us. They'll ask us how we're doing, and we'll share the good experience. Yeah, we're catching them. And then that's it. There they go, and we keep going.
That's good. How is it balancing the shop stuff with actually guiding? Is that ever like a tough thing for you to balance?
I mean, so we don't sell anything there, right? I don't even staff anybody there. What I have up on the Smith is it's an old service station. So I got like 2 garage doors where I put rafts in and pull them out. We got a little office space with a desk at the front, clean bathroom. So when I get these clients that are driving from DC or from Charleston or from Charlotte or from wherever they're coming from. They meet me at the shop. They can go to the bathroom. We usually have the raft hooked up to the truck already, pulled out, and we move their vehicle to where we're going to finish the trip. They hop in with us. We go upriver and we float down in their vehicle. So it's not a shop per se. What it is, it's a meeting place, to coordinate with clients is what it is.
I gotcha.
So if we have a group, like last week, we had a client book, I think he booked 3 boats for the same day. He was trying to introduce some of his friends from Thailand, never fly fished before. And so we let's say we ran one, close to the dam, one kind of like, right through town in Bassett, and the other one a little bit downstream east of that through Fieldale. Yeah, they wouldn't see each other all day, and all that water is good water. So that's 18 miles and, 3 different beats of a 6-mile float. If we do have like clients that requested to be together, we'll facilitate that as well. We'll just try to spread out a little bit. And then a lot of times what we'll do is we'll call it leapfrog, where we'll give each other different opportunities to fish in front and get on water before the other group does. And we also have some private access as well. We have some access to private land where, we can fish in between the beats, which is sometimes effective as well. I have a launch behind my shop, for instance, with a ramp where I could put in or pull out there. I make that accessible to anybody that wants to float it. So the kayak people, sometimes they'll call me and say, "Can I take it out your shop?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." We want to keep that kind of open because they stock right on the bridge right behind my shop. They'll put, rainbow trout in there between the months of October through once a month. They'll stock right behind my shop. And if I keep the access, then they'll continue to stock it. If I privatize the access, then they won't. The state of Virginia doesn't, stock on private land. So yeah, we can always stay away and spread out,
With that Air Force group you were mentioning before, what does that look like? Is it like I don't even know what the right terminology is in platoon, but is it like a whole platoon?
So what they have now is, which they after discussion with them, like, because I was curious myself to how it came about. They do these event listings and they send it to everybody that's on base, right? And they say, fly fish on the Cape Fear River for a day. And let's say it's $50. The government subsidized the cost for them to get them the opportunity to go on the trip. One of my guys had a teen pilot, and he said they were really excited. They really got after it. They were like really animated, and they had a ton of fun doing it. And that's kind of what we want to create. We want to create that buzz where they could see themselves doing it in the future, or continue with it. That's kind of always like the highest mark, I think, that someone's first experience on a trip that they want to, do it themselves in the future. They got after it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So they showed up in their own bus, at the takeout, shuttled them upriver in two vehicles, and then started the trip on an 8-mile float down the Cape Fear River. Real scenic. That was right during like the heat, that really hot time of year. So got a rain shower like halfway through the afternoon, and that ended up being really good to cool everybody down for a little bit, and then just whack the spotted bass. I mean, everybody was catching them.
That's cool. Are there any other species that kind of fly under the radar that you guys target in like the warmer water stretches? Like, do you guys are there warmouth in there? Maybe not. Maybe that's too far north for warmouth.
I'd say like 2 kind of come to mind that are, emerging fisheries that people know about that are in the fly fishing realm that kind of fish for them, but they're less targeted, less fish for. And one is the long-nosed gar. They grow to really, and the other is the common carp is probably like the most technical fishing when it comes to fly fishing. You gotta be really stealthy in approach. You gotta make an excellent presentation. And then the hook set on carp is really difficult. A lot of times you don't see the eat or even feel the eat. You kind of got to read the carp's body language. If he sees the fly and you see him go down in a swirl, you kind of got to lift soft. You want to get on them, but you don't want to like hit them too hard because their mouths are soft. So that's some of our most technical stuff. Is definitely the gar fishing is kind of just, people they got a really bad reputation, right? I actually had a 20-minute discussion with a guide out of Tennessee that they're fun to catch. And he was trying to tell me that, he grew up in Florida and fished with so-and-so. And that's a trash fish. The only good one is dead. And so he said that they're invasive. I said, actually, they've been around since the Mesozoic, and they're actually more native than those Tennessee tailworm trout that your fish that have been stocked. He didn't like hearing that, but they are tremendously fun to catch. And once in a while, I get someone that just wants to target, let's say, carp fishing, a real technical fisherman that's, interested in getting another species on their list. So those are the two ones that are warm waters, that bigger fish. We got lucky in May this year on the Hito and the Flat River. We had a really good cicada hatch, like a 20-pound grass carp this year on a cicada pattern, which was a really cool eat, and a lot of commons mixed in with them, little common carp.
How do you source the flies that you're using? Do you do a lot of tying, or do you just kind of buy in bulk, given that you're on so many trips?
Both. I mean, so I say our slowest time of year is like January. I mean, trip wise. So I get a good push of people planning in November, December, gift cards and all that stuff. Right. And then once we get into February, we're booking like crazy in February for March. I think we ran 24 white bass trips on the this March. And so we got a little down period. So that's kind of where I tie my most flies, is between, let's say, December and February. But once we get full swing into trout fishing and I buy a ton of flies. I use a lot of the major companies like Umpqua, Feather Merchants, and Colorado. I use not as much Montana Fly Company as much as I used to, but some from Fulling Mill Company in New Hampshire up there. And there's one other one. I bought some from Rio, but I'm gonna not buy from Rio anymore. It takes a month to get flies from them, and it's just, I'm kind of impatient like that. I found a really good company in Pennsylvania, Lively Legs. They gave me a pro discount on their flies. And I swear by them fishing for trout. They're fantastic flies. It's just it's like something they've never seen before, the trout. And they eat them pretty good for us.
I know Fulling Mill in particular had a really, really good cicada pattern that I know a couple people were throwing. It's super, super realistic, and it had really good hardware on it too. So you could throw it at big carp and stuff. Is that I guess, let's see, you've already gone through a cicada cycle in your area, or was this your first kind of major one?
This was the 15-year and 17-year. It was pretty good. We had a lot of bad weather, which kind of made it difficult. We had some high water conditions as well, but we had a window where it was really good for a solid week. So for this area, this was the one. 5 years ago, similarly, we had it on the Smith, and a lot of people were catching big carp on Philpott Lake. And this is 2020, in May of 2020, and we were catching brown trout on cicadas. We're catching 6-inch brown trout on size, 4 flies, which is pretty cool to see them try to get their mouth around that thing. But that's when that flood came. We had that huge flood event. That kind of really hurt that hatch and emergence timing wasn't good with the rain. So
yeah,
that's kind of a thing. In general, though, is you always get these big rainstorms that come in May. You got to adjust your schedule accordingly to try to work around that.
I mean, I know the timing is just kind of the major factor, but are there certain other conditions that you like to take into account when you're trying to think about what the best opportunities for it are? Is it I guess does additional wind help kind of knock some of those bugs into the water, or does that hurt?
So what we found with the carp this year on the flat is they kind of like the trees that are over the water, right? So if you got oaks that are over the water on the edge, and you got a cut bank, you have a really steep bank where you can see the erosion, or where the water. A lot of times when you see that really steep cut bank, that just means depth immediately. And if you have overhanging oak trees in an area like that, and then you have a little indentation where that bank moves in a little bit, that's kind of the ideal water that we found for them. So the carp, typically on the flat river, they'll be muddy in the lower part of the river where it meets the Eno, and we could sight fish for them there. But when the cicadas were out, they had moved out of their typical haunts into these deeper edges where the trees are. So if you have an oak with a a lot of cicadas in it, and you have that cut bank and you have a little bit of depth there for protection. That's where we're finding a lot of those fish. So I'd say those are some of the check boxes we were looking for.
I gotcha. And it's something I've always really wanted to do. I mean, I know I've caught fish on cicadas just because they're around every summer, but I've never gotten a carp on one, but I've also never seen kind of like the craziness. I know how crazy it can get. This was probably a good year to do it, and I probably missed my window.
Well, it's funny you say that. My buddy and I were just getting off of, we were trying to find them like up in like the northwest part of Falls Lake. We found some, but we didn't find a lot of active eating fish in there. And we're pulling the boat out, and this guy pulls up. He goes, "Are they here? Are they here?" I was like, "Yeah, they're not really eating them though. Where should we go? Where should we go?" And he said he had a group of 12 guys. They try to find the peak locations. So I was talking to a couple of my friends about that, and we're looking at locations maybe for next year. So we might be like trying to find some water where that peak emergence will be and crossing over again. So maybe we'll turn into like a group of cicada hunters too.
Like storm chasers, but
yeah, that's right.
Chaser. That's awesome though. Do you have kind of like a favorite aspect of guiding? I know you said you kind of got into all of this because you just love the idea of teaching people, but is there anything specific that you find like the most rewarding when you're guiding?
A lot of guides might, disagree with this, but I really like working with beginners and just sharing their first experience fly fishing with them and just teaching them the basics. I was listening to Tom Rosenbauer's podcast a couple weeks ago, and he had a guide from the, Pacific Northwest, and he says, "I don't work with beginners anymore. I find that I'm fishing their flies for them, drift in, and I don't think I would enjoy that. I mean, granted, it's good to have, a guy that has years of experience and that could put it, on a plate from 80 feet every once in a while, but just the enjoyment of, getting someone's first experience fly fishing and getting that positive feedback and feeling of accomplishment that they have that's probably the most rewarding thing for me, is just that first experience fly fishing. And when they put it all together where they, they present the fly, they get the hook set, they manage their line, and they get the fly to the net. And sometimes that comes in stages, right? Maybe they, finally get a good cast, or maybe they finally lift the rod and get tight when they should and hold on to the line, So yeah, I still really get a tremendous enjoyment out of just teaching beginners and getting their first experience out there on the water, fly fishing.
Yeah, it really is too, like just the little things, like even if you can get someone to make one adjustment that's gonna like bring their skill level up a little notch. I used to have someone who I was trying to teach, and they would say, "Oh, I'm unteachable. Like I'm never gonna be good at this." But if you can just get someone to like change one thing, it can really affect their success. And, if you're running a guided trip for what is the typical length? Like 4 hours, 6 hours, or?
Yeah. So like 4.5 on a half day, and then, 8 or longer on a full day.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of time to practice and just knock out those little things one by one. And then you get off the water and you're a lot better than when you started.
I often tell people, like, they ask like, well, what should I do? Should I go take a lesson, or should I do an introductory class? And I mean, I think, what Orbis does with their fly fishing 101 is great, first experience. But, if I were new to it, I would definitely hire a guide, just because the amount of repetition and focus you'll receive on instruction directly. I think that gets you up to speed and a basic skill level so much quicker than like any other thing. Like, no offense, like casting in a parking lot compared to like, being in a boat and actually catching a fish. And so a lot of times if you're fishing in sunfish water, like every 10 fish will be a small largemouth. So we teach on the water. We don't really do casting lessons. I'll regrettably do them if we have, someone that says, "I need to go 30 more feet and I'm going bone fishing in Belize tomorrow." I was like, all right, I'll do an occasional casting lesson. But our feedback with people is that are the beginners that want to get into it, we want to get them out in the raft on that platform above the water, just the amount of repetition that you could get. That's kind of the way we teach. We want to get people out on the water. You don't got to worry about getting stuck or ever. If you throw in a tree, we'll just paddle over there and get you out of the tree. You got to worry about the current pulling on the line because We're in a fixed position. So take out a lot of those variables when you get in the raft and you get someone casting for the first time.